Good afternoon, loss adjusters, and welcome to our FNS51420 Diploma of Loss Adjusting Melbourne Lockdown COVID-19 Support Program. And this support program, people, is number 007 for this week, where we're helping out the people that are in lockdown in Melbourne who are studying the FNS51420 Diploma of Loss Adjusting at the Australian Security Academy. So this is the seventh one in our series, and what we're looking at in this program today, right now, is workers' compensation. Now, if you would like to watch the replay of this program, because this one's really important for loss adjusters, if you want to see the replay, go over to this YouTube channel, okay? If you look on YouTube and you type in Michael Evans, Private Investigator Australia, this channel will come up. And tomorrow morning, okay, after 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, you'll be able to see this number 7 in our series about workers' compensation, is the claimant a worker? So what has brought this about for those studying the Diploma of Loss Adjusting today is a contemporary piece of news. And that contemporary piece of news appeared on LinkedIn and in the press. And it was about a tribunal from Fair Work Australia have ruled that a Deliveroo courier should be classified as an employee and not a contractor. Now, this was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it's something that comes up quite regularly, but it's not a workers' compensation injury claim. This is an argument between a delivery driver and his employer. Good afternoon, Chris. Great to see you, mate. So it's raised the issue about workers' compensation and who is a worker. So no better thing to do than bring in the person who does a lot of workers' compensation investigations and knows who workers are. Welcome to the program, Pat. How are you going?
Good afternoon. I'm very well.
Pat, can you go through for us, mate, the issues around is the person a worker in workers' compensation claims?
Certainly. Look, workers' compensation investigations right across the board in the private sector, whether you're a private investigator or a loss adjuster, that comprises a huge amount of your work, probably at a ballpark about 80% of your work that you do. A lot of the investigation companies, we get feedback from them saying that, you know, probably 80% of their work is workers' compensation or work cover claims that they actually investigate or deal with. So one of the very first things you've got to determine is whether the person is an employee of the organisation or they're a subcontractor. Now, a person is an employee, they then become a worker as defined in the statutory definition of it. And it's one of the things that you have to sort of determine right at the very start. You know, it's pointless going through an investigation if you suddenly realise that the person is in fact a contractor or a subcontractor rather than an employee. So that's one of the very first things. Now, there's a lot of resources on the internet. A lot of it comes from the Australian Taxation Office, various different places where you can source the information. It's based on a multi-factor assessment. You know, there's no one thing that says this person is an employee or a worker as defined under the legislation. So you've got to look at a range of things, and I'll go through those now. Independent contractors run their own business. That's the very first issue that you've got to look at. They run their own business and are responsible for their own business. Anything other than that, yes, you've got to define whether they are an employee or a worker as defined in the organisation they work for. Now, the first thing that you look at is the equipment. You know, the business, if you're an employee, the business or the organisation you work for will provide all the equipment, assets, tools to do the job or whatever like that. They will be provided by the business, or they'll be given the person who's a worker or an employee, they'll be given an allowance to select their own equipment or assets or tools. So generally, if the person is responsible for their own tools, pays for it, and that forms part of their income tax at the end of the year, they work for themselves and they run their own business. So that's the first test, the piece of equipment. Contractors don't receive any allowance, or they don't get any tools. They don't have any control over what equipment is given to them, because they look after themselves. So that's the first thing you look at. Is the equipment, tools, furniture, chairs, computer, all of that sort of stuff, is that provided by the business, or do they provide that for themselves? So that's the very first part of the test. The next aspect you've got to look at is the commercial risk. When you do work as an employee, the business you work for accepts the legal responsibility for what you actually do. So any faults or rectifications or anything like that, that comes back to the actual employer or the organisation who's undertaken that work for someone. The business is actually liable for the cost of rectification and defects and things like that, or anything that needs to be adjusted at the end of the job. Whereas a contractor, they look after that themselves. And if you're a contractor working for a business, and you find this in construction sites a lot, construction sites have a principal contractor, they have subcontractors that do formwork, they do electrical work, plumbing, concrete formwork, all sorts of things like that. And they're all contractors that work for the principal contractor. Now, the principal contractor, they're the organisation who is undertaking the construction job or whatever it is that you're doing. But you'll have a whole range of people who are contracting to them. Now, all of those people who come in and do contract work, they will be responsible for looking after that side of it. And on that point too, just coming back to that, from a work health and safety point of view, I'll bring that in just while I touch on it. That's why you have toolbox meetings through the course of the construction. You might have different contractors on site one day as to the next day. You might have electrical contractors, or you might have plumbers coming in on a particular day. And that's why you have workplace toolbox talks and things like that, to actually address the fact that, hang on, the workplace has changed from yesterday. We've got different people in there. So, yeah, so in regards to the commercial risk, yep, any rectifications or alterations or any warranty type issues, they're dealt with by the organisation who is the business, whereas a contractor, they look after that themselves. Control over work, that's another huge part of it. If the business that's conducting the operation, if they have total control over what work they give the person, and they organise that, the business directs the way that the work's done, what's to be done, what tools are to be used, how it's to be done, that then defines the person as a worker as well, as an employee and a worker. Contractors have freedom over how they do things, what tools they use, when they do it, how they do it, and they have freedom in regards to that. Whereas when they are an employee, they don't have that carte blanche freedom. The next thing that you look at is the ability to delegate. Now, a contractor has the ability to delegate work, hire in another contractor to give them a hand, or bring in a second person or a second organisation to do some work in regards to the way it's done. A business who employs someone strictly as an employee doesn't allow the employee to delegate work or bring people in. It's that the ability to delegate is a pretty big issue. And sometimes you'll find that in, like in the security industry, you'll have business owners that have a business, and then they bring subcontract security people in, or firms in to do work, things like that, where they have one-offs in regards to large operations that they're doing. So yeah, that ability to delegate, that's another issue. The basis of payment's probably the biggest issue that will define whether a person's an employee or a worker or a contractor. Now, if the worker's paid for the hours they work, the time they work, and they have no control over the price per item or price per task, that type of thing, or commissions, for example, the worker is paid basically on the way that the business organises that particular business venture. Contractors, they're paid per price, per job, per hour, per task, whatever they're doing. Again, that basis on how they get paid, that's a fairly large part of how you determine whether a person's an employee and a worker. Quoting for work. Contractors quote for work, where the business will be doing that in the background and delegating the work straight to the employee or the worker to do. There'll be no flexibility, no freedom in regards to it. You'll find that the business does all of that. A contractor, on the other hand, an independent contractor who runs their own business, they'll be putting quotes in for themselves for each task, for each item, per unit, per hour, per whatever the business arrangement is. So contractors are paid differently to employees. Quotes are calculated basically on an hourly rate or a rate per item per time that goes on. The other part of it that comes in is taxation, superannuation, taxation. You've got employee entitlements such as sick leave, leave, those types of things. Contractors don't get paid leave. They don't get paid sick leave. They basically will work however many hours that they have, and their individual business arrangements, they will sort that out themselves in how they conduct their own business and how they run their own business. So the superannuation, taxation side of things, employee entitlements, that's another thing. So all of these questions, you have to ask all of these questions in regards to determining whether someone is a worker / employee or they're a contractor. Now, if they're not an employer or a worker as defined under the legislation, they're not covered under the workers' compensation legislation. So it's your first step in regards to doing workers' compensation investigations. Contractors have independence in the way that they do things, the ability to accept or reject work, the ability to work for other people. You'll find that a contractor generally won't work for the one person, albeit sometimes they do. However, it depends on the business arrangements, the contracts, the contract of employment, the contract of engagement, those types of things. They're documents that you need to ask for when you go and do these investigations to just finalise exactly what's the situation. Is it a contractor or is it an employee? Is it a worker? The person who you're trying to determine whether that they're an employee, worker or a contractor, it's not automatically defined that if they've got an ABN and a registered business name with the Office of Fair Trading or whoever the local jurisdictional organisation is, that doesn't automatically define whether they're a contractor or not. They can still have an ABN, they can still have a registered business name, but they will be an employee because they mainly work for the one person doing the one thing and have no control over how they do the work. So the ability to accept and reject work or work for other people or work for other organisations, that's another part of the questioning that you have to ask in regards to whether the person's an employee or a worker. Now, contractors can employ apprentices, trainees, specialists, other people that come into the business, like labourers and things like that, whereas an employee, they don't have the ability to be able to employ people directly in regards to the way that the work's done. Labour hire agreements. Now, there's another thing that's just at the very end of this. You'll find that labour hire companies like Skilled Engineering and places like that, and this is a very important concept when it comes down to doing workers' compensation common law claims. You have to determine who's the employer. So you might find that Skilled Engineering, they actually employ the person who's the worker, but they're placed at a large company like Coca-Cola Amatil or Visiboard or one of those big companies, and you'll find that despite the fact that they work at Coca-Cola or Visiboard, they're actually an employee of the labour hire company. Generally, also, you'll find that where you have those large-scale input of workers from a labour hire company, you'll usually find that there'll be a manager from the labour hire company, whether it's Skilled Engineering or one of the other ones. They will have a manager placed in Coca-Cola Amatil or Visiboard, and they'll work on site making sure that their worker is complying with all the work health and safety issues and the way that they should conduct their work. So it's a very important issue when you start looking at, is the person an employee or are they a subcontractor? And you need to look at all of those different things which I've just spoken about collectively to form that basically what it is. It's a common law test. So, yeah.
Thank you, Pat. So the issues are evolving. They could be a visitor to the premises and not a worker. So someone that's just walked into that place and they've slipped, tripped and fell in that workplace. Now, they can sue for public liability, but they can't sue for workers' compensation. A subcontractor can sue for common law, but can't sue for a statutory claim. So all these things start to sort of come into it. This is where you must know, as a loss adjuster, your stuff in relation to this for workers' compensation matters. A bad back as a result of a slip, trip and fall, well, that could go on for 7 years. So it could be very expensive. And you need to know and establish several things in the beginning. And the number one thing you've got to establish is the person a worker? If they're not a worker, then the public liability or some other form of protection or liability shield is going to kick in there. But this is workers' compensation and they need to know that. So let's have a look. As loss adjusters, we go and have a look at the case law involved with these things. So here's some case law. This one is Stevens versus Broadwood Sawmilling, and it gives you a bit of an idea about what the decision was made. And you can Google that one on the internet and have a look at it. And the other one that people really take a lot of notice of is Hollis versus Verboo. And this is very similar to the one that sparked this initial program that you're watching today, which was on LinkedIn, reported in the Sydney Morning Herald with Deliveroo. Hollis and Verboo goes back quite a way. It goes back to 2001. It's 20 years old, a piece of case law there, but it's a delivery driver in that case law. So you don't tell your claims manager or your solicitor that's instructing you anything about case law, but you should be aware of this as a loss adjuster. So that is very important. There is no stopping any investigator or loss adjuster checking out what the sort of systems are and how it all works on the internet and doing their research, just as professional interest. And there are an enormous amount of websites. They're all very helpful. This one's a lawyer's website, but you can go direct to the New South Wales Workers' Compensation Scheme iCare, and you'll learn a lot about what's involved. You'll probably even see a definition of a worker there. Now, it's really important that for those of you that are studying the Diploma of Loss Adjusting, and I said it yesterday, I'm going to play it again. I sound like a broken record, but in your supporting resources, we have glossaries.
In your Australian Security Academy learning materials on Moodle, you will be able to see glossaries of terms if you find a term or you just need to know a term that you don't understand. So here, for example, in the unit Analyse Insurance Claims, there it is. If you scroll down to past the unit evaluation section of your learning materials, and you'll see topic 5, index of glossaries. Now, let's say you're looking for a loss adjusting term, for example, estoppel, and you want to know what estoppel means. So you click on your loss adjusting terms and you have an alphabetical order of those terms, and you can look at what the definition of any of those terms are. So estoppel starts with E, so you just go directly over to E, and there's going to be a few terms there, earned premium, and there's estoppel number 2, and it tells you all about what estoppel is and where it comes from, and gives you examples. So these glossaries are only in your Australian Security Academy Diploma of Loss Adjusting qualification in your Moodle learning materials. Make the most of them.
And I haven't got it in front of me, but I guarantee if you go to that glossary and have a look at it, there will be under W, worker, and definition of a worker. It's a very, very thorough glossary. So when you make your appointment to go and speak to the people as instructed to do your loss adjusting workers' compensation matter that you're going to do, in your instructions, they're going to tell you who to interview, who the workplace health and safety officer is, or the person in charge, your first point of contact, and they're going to instruct you to go and speak to all the other witnesses too. Now, in my experience, I've got there, I've spoken to the person in charge, and they've just looked back at me. They knew I was coming. 7 days earlier, I made the appointment, and where the person's not a worker, they just sat in front of me and they're gone, never heard of this person, not now or ever was a worker here. From our own internal knowledge of the event, he wandered into a demolition site despite the warning signs, and he fell through the floor and got an injury, and that's what the ambulance and police told us, you know. So you don't know until you go and speak to these people. Neither do the insurance company instructing you. That's why they're asked you to go and find out. You get these instructions and you get these files and you get this work because they have to determine if they are liable for that claim. And if that person is a worker and the claim's being made against the workers' compensation insurance, and you confirm that, along with several other issues that Pat and I are going to be doing over the next 7 days with our extended lockdown in Melbourne to help our loss adjusting students studying down there who've got a little bit of spare time to concentrate on it by watching these assistant programs. Pat,
I'll just add something, Mike. This topic we're talking about today is a classic example of an issue that you need to deal with when you're doing your investigation. So anyone who does general insurance investigations, workers' compensation investigations, or they're a loss adjuster, you have to be an industry professional when you're doing that work. Now, in regards to your professional competence, it's really important to develop a resource library of information that you can fall back on. I remember way back, I was taught by a very, very astute man, and he was particular about the way things were done. And myself and another manager in the business, in the end, we had our own different ways of doing this. Now, the other manager that I used to work with used to have an alphabetical index book, an A to Z, and under each of the letters of the alphabet, he had reference material in there. I used to do it slightly differently in regards that I had individual files saved on my computer as a reference, so that when you go and do a job, if you want to work out what do I need to ask in regards to determining whether this person is an employee / worker or they're a subcontractor, there will be a range of questions that you have. You need to keep a track of those, have them as a prompt in a file that you can print out, that you can take out with you. You can have them as an aid memoir like they do in the military, where you have like a little flip book that's got, you know, questions that you ask in regards to certain things. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be just for workers' compensation. You may do slip, trip and falls, and there may be a range of things that you do in your slip, trip and falls that you have to cover in regards to maintenance, inspections, cleaning products, all sorts of things like that. And again, there's another file that you would have where you can pop out the questions that you have. And when you go out to do your interviews or speak to people in regards to the actual claim, you can be 100% on the ball. You won't miss anything out if you've got something to prompt you. Similarly, things like security guards that are working at a venue that is an entertainment venue where there's alcohol involved. You may find there's a series of questions that you have to ask in regards to responsible service of alcohol or a range of different things. If you've got a list that says, hang on, when I go to a venue, I need to ask these questions. If I go to a slip, trip and fall, I need to ask these questions. If I go to a burglary, what do I need to address in regards to forced entry or whatever? Make those lists of questions, and you'll build on those. You'll find that as you get re-instructed by barristers who are representing a matter that's going to court, you may find that there's more intense questions or more detailed questions that you need to ask. When you get those instructions, keep a copy of those questions and add them to your file and your reference when you go out to do the job. So your reference library should be getting built. Every job you do, you'll add to your reference library. And that gives you a really good head start in your professional competence and your competition in the industry. So, yeah, it's very important.
Great advice. And it's because you're doing the everyday mundane, you're not doing the sensational bigger than Ben-Hur thing, that library serves as a reference point to go back and keeping those instructions in particular. These are smart people instructing you, telling you what to look for. And if one's just missed one point, you've got that reference library where you've kept that. It can be very handy. People, if you want to see the replay of this program, go over here to this YouTube channel. You can see this tomorrow morning. This is what you will see. You will see 007, workers' compensation. Is the claimant a worker? It's really important. Pat, look, George is just so excited that he wants to become a loss adjuster now instead of working for the VBA, and I'm sure the VBA has seen that. Good on you, George. Your coffee mug should be there today or tomorrow, mate. Good luck with that.
G'day, George. I remember you well.
So George is very excited and he's unforgettable. And look, people, we'll be back tomorrow with more on our Diploma of Loss Adjusting Support Program with episode 008. Don't forget, tomorrow also we will be having our usual weekly investigation news program with jobs for investigators, that sort of thing. I don't put loss adjusting jobs up in here because there's too many. I can't fit them in. So if you're looking for work as a loss adjuster, there's unlimited work out there as a loss adjuster. You just need to have the qualification to be able to go and do the work. So Pat and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you then, and we'll be at episode 8 for our Diploma of Loss Adjusting Melbourne COVID Lockdown Support Program. I'm Mike Evans from the Australian Security Academy.
Good afternoon.